So welcome to Let's Code Together. I'll give you a wave. My name's Jane Knight and I'm joined by my colleague, Dr. Caroline Wilson.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon.
And so a bit of news. Since we last met at this session 2 months ago, we've had a face-to-face meeting in Berlin, which was a MEDRA user group. At the user group in Berlin, we had an interactive panel discussion, which had a similar format to these webinars. And we looked at some real life reported events that a panel of MEDRA users from across the industry had brought along to share with us as panel members. And we didn't have time to cover all the material at the session. So I'm very pleased that 2 of our panel have come along to join us today. Now, this is an exceptional one-off that we're able to do this. So welcome to Kirsten Kuhn from Merck. Welcome, Kirsten.
Thanks. Hello, everyone.
And also welcome to Lucy Tully from Roche. Hello, Lucy. So together,
thank you very much and good morning, everybody.
Good morning. So together we've got 4 of us today to give our opinions on the terms, and both Kirsten and Lucy will share their examples as we get to that point. So the first 2 slides, as always, we explain that MEDRA came about in the mid-1990s. It was an ICH initiative, and at the time the MSSO was put in place to maintain and distribute MEDRA. The activities of the MSSO are overseen by a management committee with representatives of both the industry and the regulators across ICH regions. MEDRA is owned by ICH, so the material that you see today will be, you can use the content, although we don't make the slides available, you only have the recordings on YouTube to go from. But if you quote anything or change anything, you need to acknowledge ICH as owners of MEDRA and of the material. And if you change things, you need to explain how you've changed it. I've explained that we want to make the session interactive, so we're going to use the questions panel to ask questions and make comments. We may not always agree on term selection, and in the interest of time, we'll need to agree to disagree and move on. We can't take requests, unfortunately, to code your specific verbatim terms today, but we will give you an option at the end that you can propose either new topics or actual examples for us to consider to include in future sessions. And you'll see that a number of the examples we have today have come from previous attendees. This is how we're going to do the polling. The easiest way is for you to log on with your smartphone by scanning the QR code, but alternatively, you can open an internet browser, either on your computer or your cell phone, and you type into the URL bar pollev.com. Nothing else, just pollev.com. And in order to link to the presentation, you enter my name, Jane Knight 855, as the username, Jane Knight 855, and it's completely anonymous. You don't put your own name, and that allows you to join the presentation. So the first poll, to let you get used to it, is where are you joining us from today? Where are you today? I'm here in the UK on the south coast. It's a lovely sunny day here. I see you've got North America again. Perhaps that's Catherine joining us again, or maybe someone else from the United States. So let's see where we've got South Africa. Caroline, your geography is better than mine.
South Korea, India, China, South Africa, and lots of attendees from Europe, of course. And also Russia.
Yes, Yelena's joined us from Russia, I see. Turkey. So welcome, wherever you are in the world, you're very, very welcome to be with us today. So here's the demo for the web-based browser. You can access it from the MSSO homepage. There's a training access account, and there's the password. So you may want to take a screenshot, or you can see it in Caroline's putting it in the chat now. So it's a demonstration. It'll be valid until Friday, but if you've got your own access, you're welcome to use that. Challenges. There may not always be an exact match for coding, and that's why terms can sometimes be challenging. Sometimes there may be more than one LLT that you think could be possible selections. And even the points to consider document often does give us options for handling of particular types of terms. Sometimes it's a case that we understand terms differently, and we found that even both in the panel that we did in Berlin, but also Carol Ann and I sometimes did differ in how we understand a term. So what we do when we code is we represent events by the best approximation. We choose what we think is the most appropriate, closest LLT, but we always code as reported. We never make assumptions. And what we always say is that sometimes terms can be ambiguous. Sometimes you need to use medical judgment. And we talk about ambiguity. We always include a picture which shows that there's ambiguity all around us in life. Sometimes you'll be familiar, we have some kind of ambiguous pictures or cartoons. Today we've got some flowers. Look at these flowers. At a first glance, if I saw that branch, I'd think that was a little bird sitting on the branch. The same here, perhaps. Is that a flower? And look at this one. Isn't that beautiful? So what are these? Are they, as I say, at first glance, you might think it's a bird, but actually one's a magnolia, one's a green flower bird or regal flower bird, and one's an egret orchid. So you see that we're surrounded by ambiguity, and sometimes it helps us to take a second look at a verbatim term, just as we would if we saw these flowers. So it's a balance between applying coding rules and using that medical judgment so as to preserve the safety of patients. Medical references can be helpful, and you'll see that during the session today. And sometimes it's a case that there isn't a suitable term in MedDRA and we need to request that a new term is added. So with that, let's code together. And I'm going to switch my camera off because I know it can be distracting. So our first example today is anopsia. Anopsia, very short, simple term there, but what's actually being reported? It looks very simple, and in my head, I'm already starting to think, do I know what that means? Or do we need to seek clarification? Maybe there's a more descriptive synonym available in MedDRA, and what would be the most appropriate LLT we would select? That's the first things that go through my mind when I see that term. So what about you? What would you code? How would you code this term if you saw that, anopsia? Opsia makes me think it's a vision term, something to do with vision. So we've selected a number of vision LLTs for you that you can choose from. You may need to scroll down. Our polling software's had an update since our last meeting. So if you may need to scroll down on your phone or on your computer to see all of the options. The last one on the screen, can't quite make it out, is seeking clarification from the reporter. So here are selection, or would you query the term? Let's see how you're all doing. Oh, visual field defect seems to be the biggest choice so far. Blindness is quite popular. Visual impairment seems to be popular as well. And let me just scroll down here. Got some others, or not so. Few of you would query, but by far the most popular is visual field defect. So let's lock this poll. Let's have some references. Well, we tend to go to Dorland's Medical Dictionary as our first stop when we're looking to reference a term. There are other medical dictionaries out there, but that's the one we choose to use. Anopsia, it says, is a form denoting a condition or a defect of vision. And that's what we probably all thought when we saw it. I couldn't find a reference for anopsia directly as the whole term, except from Wikipedia. I think we probably all know that we need to be a bit diligent when we're choosing our web references. But Wikipedia said that it comes from the Greek an, meaning without, and opsia, meaning opsis, meaning sight. And it's a defect in the visual field. If it's only partial, then it may be that you can help isolate the cause based on where the defect occurs. But that's Wikipedia. I also looked in dictionaries. As I say, I had difficulty finding some good medical references for this one. Anopsia said in Collins Dictionary that it was a defect in vision, maybe partial or total. So again, we've got that word defect. Doesn't say that it's the visual field this time. It seems just says it's vision. And a similar word was anopia. And that one, again, in the Collins Dictionary, is defined as an inability to see or sightless. So here I'm seeing I've got two options in the references. I'm not 100% happy with the medical credibility, as it were, or of the references, but it's telling me that it's some kind of defect in vision. So let's browse Medra now to see what our options may be. So let's go to my browser. Oh, I've got one there. So let's have a look at, let's have a look firstly for the term itself. It's not, no, there are some opsia terms, but there are other specific relating to types of visual problems like seeing half, hemianopsia. So let's have a look at the eye disorders and see where we go. Our references were telling us that it was a visual problem, vision disorders. So we can go to vision disorders. We can see that we've got separate HLTs here for visual field disorders and visual impairment. So we see even at the HLT level that it makes a big difference whether we select a visual field defect based on the Wikipedia reference. This is different types of visual field defect, whether it's a scotoma, a central defect or peripheral. And then we've got our visual impairment terms, blindness, some of the terms I showed you in the poll, blindness, maybe there's some partial, lots of non-current terms there. But we don't really know, do we, when we see, but as you can see, it makes a big difference whether we select visual field defect or a blindness type of term, or visual impairment, which a number of you selected there. We can see there is an visual impairment that might cover it because we've got partial vision loss, partial sight. We really don't really know. So I'm going to go back to my slides now. So I've seen that there are some options. I don't really know which one. I think if I was to apply the principle of worst case scenario, I would go for some kind of blindness term because we don't know, is it a visual field defect or is it some kind of partial sight? So going for some more general term of visual impairment or vision loss would indicate that there is some loss of vision, whether it's a field or in the sight itself. And here's a slide that I put together to help you. I think, as I mentioned, when I see the term, I think of opsia or opia being a visual problem, but we could do that with all of the senses. We can do the same with hearing, looking for acusia terms, cusia, osmia for smell, gazia for taste, phesia for sensation, or algia or dynia for pain. So just for some of you who may not be so familiar with coding, it's just a little tip for you, a nice slide to show you how you can use these suffixes to the terms to help you understand what the Medra terms mean, even before going to a dictionary and looking them up. So the learning points here is that we try to reference the reported condition. I wasn't very successful in my referencing. You may have been better in some preparation that you did. And as I've already said, it's important to assess the quality of the web references that you find. Consider common prefixes or suffixes from the Greek stem of the words, as I've shown you there, and search in Medra for an appropriate term. It may be that if you are unsure of the meaning, you seek clarification from the reporter. And final suggestions, I would try to seek clarification. What type of vision impairment is it? Is it a visual field or a blindness term? And if not possible, I would select vision loss because I think that is the worst case scenario and it would cover both scenarios of a defect in visual field or a decreasing of vision. So any comments on that one? Feel free to put your comments or questions in the chat. And with that one, nothing so
no questions or comments so far.
So
now it's
hand over to you then, Caroline.
There's one, I would assume the worst. There's agreement on what you said, to take the worst case approach.
Assume the worst. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
That was our thoughts too. Thank you for that agreement. Thank you. I'll hand over to you, Caroline, for the next example, and I'll put the example in the chat in case people forget what it is.
Okay. So now our next case, it is reported that a patient became depressive and anxious after death of her husband. We are provided with a sequence of events here, and I think we can all agree that the scenario is clearly described. But is split coding required, or can we find combination terms that would cover at least parts of this information? How would you approach this verbatim? Which LLTs would you select to capture the sequence and specifics of the reported findings? Patient became depressive and anxious after death of her husband. We have an LLT: death of husband, bereavement reaction, complicated grief disorder, anxiety depression, mixed anxiety and depressive disorder, adjustment disorder with anxiety, reactive depression, adjustment reaction with brief depressive reaction, adjustment disorder with mixed anxiety and depressed mood. So lots of choices here again. And you may have to scroll down on your computer or cell phone in order to see all these options. What would you do? Let's have a look what you're going for. So we have consensus here to code death of husband, but then bereavement reaction would be one option, complicated grief disorder, anxiety, depression, mixed anxiety and depressive disorder, adjustment disorder with anxiety. So we had a split of opinions here, but most of you are going for death of husband, mixed anxiety and depressive disorder, or adjustment disorder with mixed anxiety and depressed mood. So let me close the poll and look at some references here. One option for coding the reaction of the patient to the death of her husband in the poll was bereavement reaction. There's a related definition in the Dorland saying that bereavement is a deprivation causing grief and desolation, especially the death or loss of a loved one. And we are told that the period of grief and mourning following a bereavement often resembles clinical depression, but that it can be considered a normal response to such a situation. The term prolonged grief disorder is also called complicated grief disorder, and this was the LLT that was proposed in our poll, or also persistent complex bereavement disorder. And these terms describe a different condition where a feeling of intense grief persists and interferes really with daily life activities. It represents an abnormal behavior, an abnormal reaction, and cannot be considered a normal bereavement reaction anymore. In this reference, it is further specified that for making this diagnosis, symptoms must at least last 1 year in adults and at least 6 months in children and adolescents. This time frame distinguishes normal grief from persistent grief. In addition, several symptoms must have occurred almost daily in the months preceding diagnosis. And in the 5th edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, even 6 specified symptoms are required. Here you see some of them: identity disruption, marked sense of disbelief about the death, avoidance of reminders that the person is dead, etc., etc. So it's a clearly defined medical concept. Our verbatim reports that the patient became depressive and anxious as a reaction to the loss of her husband. We have no information about further symptoms or duration of these symptoms. And we can say that this isn't anymore a, so to say, normal grief reaction. It exceeds what normally might be expected. These conditions are called adjustment disorders, defined as maladaptive responses to any type of stressful life events, like in our case, the death of a loved one, but stressors could also be business difficulties, natural disasters, persistent illness, chronic disease, etc. So let me switch to the browser in order to search for our terms here. Death of husband was one option, and most of you voted for that. And this was, of course, the event that caused the adverse events in the patient. Here it is, death of husband, and you see it's grouped under PT, death of relative. It's grouped in social circumstances, so no secondary linkages because social circumstances is an uniaxial SOC. So this would capture the cause for the adverse events in the patient. The first thing that we have to capture in our sequence of events. What else did we have? Bereavement reaction. Here we are, bereavement reaction. Again, if we look into the hierarchy, it's grouped under grief reaction, under adjustment disorders, and psychiatric disorders. So with this, we would capture the resulting reaction in the patient, the grief reaction. The complicated grief disorder is here, and you see it's grouped under persistent complex bereavement disorder, so based on the DSM-5 definitions, and it's also grouped under adjustment disorders. This wouldn't be suitable, we saw that before, because the diagnosis requires some additional conditions, namely a severe and persistent grief and a whole series of symptoms. It's clearly defined, we don't have this information. Anxiety depression was another option in the poll. Here it is. I go to the browser now. Right mouse click, here we are. Anxiety depression is grouped under depression and under HLT depressive disorders. This LLT would not capture the fact that the patient became anxious and depressive as a reaction to the death of her husband. So it does not capture the reactive aspect of this condition. And same is true for LLT, let me check, mixed anxiety and depressive disorder. This was another option in the poll. It's grouped under the same HLT, and it combines anxiety and depression here. But again, it does not capture the fact that this was a reaction to the death of the husband. Now let's look for the adjustment disorder. Oops. And search. Here we have the adjustment disorders. And you see there's one vague term, a general term, adjustment disorder, but we also have adjustment disorder with anxiety. Here we have the adjustment disorder with anxiety, and we have the adjustment disorder with depressed mood. So you could, of course, now say, well, let me go to the browser again and show you in the hierarchy. Here we have a separate HLGT, adjustment disorders, and under HLT adjustment disorders, you see the adjustment disorder with anxiety and the adjustment disorder with depressed mood. So you could, of course, now, when only looking superficially at this HLT, say, well, I will do some split coding in order to capture both aspects, the anxiety and the depression. But if you look at the neighbor PTs, you see that there is a perfect combination term available, adjustment disorder with mixed anxiety and depressed mood, combining the anxiety and the depression. And the fact that it was an adjustment disorder, that it was a reaction to a stressor, in this instance, the death of the husband. So if you look at this PT here, reactive depression was one option. So here we capture the reaction to the death of the husband and the fact that it led to a depression. But again, we would end up with the adjustment disorder with depressed mood, and we would have a better term available, a combination term that would capture both the anxiety and the depressed mood. So let me switch back to my slides. Here we are. When coding this verbatim, we will have to consider all reported information to fully reflect the reported chain of events. Again, it is reported to take, it's important to take the time to search MedDRA both top down and bottom up to find suitable terms and combination terms. And it is, if you're not familiar with the terms found, one should reference reliable textbooks or websites for clarification. This said, we would code to LLT death of husband under PT death of relative. We would also capture the bereavement reaction by coding to LLT bereavement reaction under PT grief reaction, and the adjustment disorder with mixed anxiety and depressed mood, same PT. You may think that selection of LLT bereavement reaction is not necessary in addition to LLT adjustment disorder with mixed anxiety and depressed mood. But adjustment disorders may be caused by different stressors, as mentioned earlier, like difficulties at work, natural disasters, chronic disease, etc. And we wanted to capture the full chain of events and their causal relationship here. Any questions or comments,
No,
Jane?
no, there are no questions so far, Caroline. It might be a bit soon, so they might come in later.
Okay, then I hand over to you again.
Oh, here we go. The death of the husband may be in the medical history. So I thought there might be
Yes,
something.
yes,
The
yeah.
husband might be in the medical history.
Yeah. It's not an adverse event in the patient. So this may be in medical history, but the rest of it is are the adverse events in the patient, the reactions.
And Joanna says, so you chose adjustment disorder with mixed anxiety and depressed mood. Yes, it's the one on the screen, Joanna.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's a perfect combination term, combining the adjustment disorder with the symptoms, anxiety and depression.
All three.
All three, yeah.
Good, thank you. Okay, thank you, Caroline. Well, I'll do the next example. So the next one is emotional stress and quick-tempered. So again, here, what do you first think of emotional stress? What's being reported? Do we need to seek clarification from the reporter to fully understand it? And here we seem to have two symptoms, emotional stress and quick-tempered. Is there a suitable combination term, just as Caroline found a combination term for the last example? Or do we split code? Which do you think it would be? What would be the most appropriate LLT? So here again, for you can have the chance to vote. First of all, remember you may need to scroll down. The one at the bottom is challenging attitude. So we've got stress, acute reaction to stress, emotional, a couple of emotional terms because it says emotional in the verbatim, irritable, anger, short-tempered or challenging attitude. What do you think there? Do we need one term or two terms? You see how you can carry on voting. I'm just going to move on to see where your current thoughts lie. Emotional distress is the runaway most popular vote on that one with 44%. It'll probably go up now as, wow. Gosh, very clear opinion from you all on that one. Let me just scroll down to check. Is there anything I'm missing? Anything? Short-tempered again to capture the second part of the report, and for a few people for some of the other terms, just to give us some variety. Thank you for your votes. I'll lock the poll. And now let's look at some references before we go to the browser. Well, we found a reference for emotional stress from the Encyclopedia of Behavioral Medicine, and it gives a synonym for emotional distress. This is interesting because that's the one that you all voted for. Emotional stress involves the experience of negative affect, such as anxiety, in the context of a physiological stress response that includes cardiovascular and hormonal changes. Emotional stress commonly occurs when an individual perceives that he or she does not have adequate personal resources to meet situational demands effectively. That's your classic definition, isn't it, Lazarus, for stress? Emotional distress, I think, is the key thing there to give us the synonym. Quick-tempered, we're also able to reference, is likely to become angry very easily. Quick-tempered, quick-tempered. So if we go now to Medra to browse, go to the browser, have a look here. We start with our words. Let's start with emotional stress to make sure it's not in there, and we see what comes up. Well, there's the LLT of emotional distress, which was given as the synonym from the reference we found, and that's an emotional and mood disturbances. So that's interesting. That one falls into mood hierarchy for the term, whereas if we were to just do the search on stress, and I'm going to limit it to the psychiatric disorders by clicking here in the browser to limit it when I do my search. Let's have a look at what stress terms there may be, and we can see the hierarchy for, so we've got a number of acute reactions to stress, emotional distress again, distress on its own as non-current, stress symptoms. So let's just have a look at the hierarchy for stress. We can look at it on the right-hand side here by placing my cursor on it. We can see there that stress is limited to anxiety. That has a very different hierarchy from the emotional distress, which has a more of a mood element to it. So without being an expert on some of these psychiatric terms, I agree with you that the emotional distress term seems to be closer. I like the hierarchy being within mood, capturing the emotion, and it also fits the reference we found with the synonym. So now let's look at temper. Let's see what terms we have for temper. You see, we've got short-tempered as an LLT. We don't have quick-tempered, and that has a PT of anger. That was one of the options I gave you. That's also in the emotional and mood disturbances HLT, so it fits with the other term that we will have chosen. But because they are separate PTs, we'll need to capture them both. We can't say, well, one of them covers them all, as we might if it was a diagnosis with a symptom. We would have a PT of anger with the short-tempered LLT underneath it, and we would have emotional distress, which is another PT under the same HLT. Here we've got mental distress, emotional distress, capturing the emotional component. And those are the two I think would be my choice on these. So I'll go back to my slides. So our learning points from that in choosing the two LLTs is that we would always try to reference the reported conditions, especially for some of these psychiatric terms or mental health terms that we may not be experts on. Caution again to assess the quality of the web references that you find. Search in Medra for the appropriate terms and always check the hierarchy. Within the MSSO browser, you have the option to go to the browser on the left-hand side that you've seen us both doing today. And if you're not clear about the meaning of the reported event, ask the reporter for clarification. So it's the same principles that we've been talking about so far in the session. And our final suggestions, summary is emotional distress and short-tempered, which has a PT of anger. Any questions on that one, Carol Ann?
No, just confirmations that of the choices. Yeah.
Thank you. That's good.
No
so
further.
I'll hand over to you then, Caroline, for our next example.
Yes, let me take over. Here we are. So the next verbatim describes an autoaggressive behavior. It is, well, is it clear what is meant by that? It seems to be clear and non-ambiguous, but can we find a suitable term? So how would you approach this verbatim? Which LRT would you select to capture this reported finding? Autoaggressive behavior, aggressive behavior, aggression, self-destructive behavior, deliberate self-harm, intentional self-injury, or self-injurious behavior without suicidal intent. What would you do with this one? So most of you are going with for self-destructive behavior, but some of you would also select aggressive behavior or deliberate self-harm, intentional self-injury. So let me close the poll here and look at some references. One option was self-destructive behavior. So what does self-destructive mean? It means that someone is behaving in a way that is likely to make you fail or be harmed or killed, meaning that such behaviors include both emotional or physical self-harm. And they may surface as self-harm or self-injury, such as hair pulling or cutting, binge eating, impulsive and risky sexual behavior, suicidal ideation, remaining in an abusive relationship, engaging in harmful addictive behaviors, like for instance gambling, or less obvious self-destructive destructive behaviors like negative self-talk or isolating oneself from loved ones. This means that self-destructive behavior is a more general term, and self-injurious behavior is only one type in this group of abnormal behaviors. So let me switch to the browser again. Here we are. So aggressive behavior here we are. Aggressive behavior is grouped under PT aggression, but this is a different medical concept, since the aggressive behavior is directed outwards towards other people or objects, not against oneself. So both aggressive behavior and aggression would not be suitable for our case. Deliberate self-harm is of course available in Medwa. No, I'm not good at typing. Here we are, deliberate self-harm. It's grouped under PT intentional self-injury, self-injurious behavior, self-injurious behavior with suicidal intent, self-injurious with suicidal intent, again also grouped under intentional self-injury, as you can see here. They are all grouped, when you look into the hierarchy here, in subpsychiatric disorders. You see under suicidal and self-injurious behaviors, NEC. Under suicidal and self-injurious behavior, here we have the intentional self-injury. But as we saw before, that autoaggressive behavior manifests not only as self-injurious behavior, so physical autoaggression, but may also manifest as emotional autoaggression. And in our case, it was not reported that the patient showed self-injurious behavior. We would add information when coding to one of the LLTs under PT intentional self-injury. And that is why, and you all voted, the majority of you went for this LLT, self-destructive behavior is the best choice here. I go to the self-destructive behavior. Here we are, same PT, also under psychiatric disorders. It's really the best choice in our case. It is neutral and does not assume either physical or emotional autoaggression. So this would be the best code assignment or term assignment for this verbatim. Let me switch back to the learning points. Here we are. If not an expert in the medical field, psychiatry, one will have to search top down and bottom up in psychiatric disorders to look for potential suitable terms, and also use reliable references for clarification of the background and meaning of the terms found. And if still unsure, of course, you can also query for clarification. Our final suggestion is to code to LLT and PT self-destructive behavior. Any questions, Jane,
No,
or comments?
No questions or comments so far, Carol-Ann? Nothing.
Yeah.
So far.
Well done. So I think most of you went for the correct assignment. Okay, with this, I hand over to you, Kerstin, now.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, this is one of the terms we had coming up in one of our studies. A very long text. Intestinal obstruction secondary to progression of the primary tumor, melanoma, by peritoneal implantations. One thing, yes, we definitely understand what this means. It's a sequence of events. The main issue that we had here, that we could not split for some reasons. So we had to deal with this and try to extract the most detail that's possible and assign a certain code for that. So that is really the thing. What might be of interest, this is not an oncology study, so the primary tumor is not the study indication, but it's a history. Okay. So now we have the situation. Just type in what you would consider most important, how to handle this.
Should I close the poll?
Yeah, I'm just thinking,
Yeah.
it seems to be that there's nothing really new coming up. Very interesting what came in here. And yeah, basically, most people also went for what we chose at that time. There was one, the intestinal obstruction due to malignant progression that I saw, which I don't know if it was actually available already when we had the situation. Guess what? Can we? Yeah.
Shall we browse? Shall we browse or shall we?
Yes, I would really love to see this.
Yes. Does that term exist? Can we see if that
Yes,
term exists?
that's what I wanted to check.
It sounds like a combination term. Due to.
Yeah.
It's the only thing that I get is malignant gastrointestinal obstruction.
Yeah, and that's what we chose as well. It would be nice if we had a term going for the.
So we have the
progression of the other thing is we were not clear if we wanted to code or how to handle and to extract this. So that is really the extraction of the essence of this term. So that is absolutely right. That we have to capture the obstruction and we have to capture that it's malignant as the cause.
Mm-hmm.
That's really the one we can make sure to get closest to what is reported. And just as it was so the context, this is one of the rare cases where we had to do context coding, which we usually don't do in our company. But we had checked that the primary tumor was reported in the medical history. And so we were sure to capture the full information in the data somehow. And that's also very important to have data entry guidelines, which are aligned with coding guidelines. So to really make sure that people know where to put medical history and what is considered an adverse event. So, for example, an adverse event would not be if it was a normal cause of a pre-existing condition. But if it was more severe than expected, then it would be an adverse event and needed to be coded in this case as malignant tumor progression as well. But this was expected, and this was one we discussed with medical as well. Yeah, and then this is checking which parts have been covered and then make sure that the report is fully understood. And you can make sure to find the information later when you're doing analysis of databases. Okay, thanks. So I give it back.
Yeah, yes.
That's already the conclusion. Sorry, I was talking too much about this already.
Thank you, Kirsten. There are no questions so far on that one. Thank you for sharing that. We often get requests in our feedback. Can we have more oncology, more tumor-related terms? So it's really good to see this. And I do like your learning points that I think that sums it up, being aware of the context and what's already been captured, breaking the term down. Thank you for sharing. Any questions coming in? Anyone got questions or comments for Kirsten? No, nothing so far. Thank you, Kirsten. If you weren't with us at the beginning, you might have missed that we explained that when we met recently in Berlin for a user group, we did a panel discussion and we had two of our panelists that weren't able to fit in all the questions in the time. So Kirsten and Lucy have both joined us today as special guests to share their examples.
Yeah. And here in this example, the malignant bowel obstruction, most of you have voted for malignant gastrointestinal obstruction, but this is more general than the malignant bowel obstruction because this only really refers to the intestine, whereas this would also refer to the stomach.
So we've had a couple of comments around splitting. Now you mentioned, Kirsten, that splitting wasn't possible in this case. If splitting had been possible, a couple of suggestions around splitting would be helpful. Some of our audience are saying that splitting would be helpful. And one of the suggestions is to add tumor progression. What do you think about that?
Yes, if splitting had been possible, we would have probably added that, or at least asked the site to clarify if this was more serious progression than expected, meaning according to data entry guidelines, it would have to be a separate AE, or if this was the normal course and they just reported it and that they really only wanted to report the obstruction. But on the other hand, yeah, could also be, is this newly occurring metastasis? That if you were able to query and split, we would have probably asked that as well.
Yeah.
Just to get more
Get
detail out of this case, because it's not an oncology study and it could be important. But yeah, we didn't have that chance at that time, unfortunately.
Yeah, and we had several of these examples in the panel discussion where really context information was relevant in order to get onto the correct path for coding purposes.
Mm.
Sometimes, especially in clinical studies, you need some context information. What kind of indication? What is the study indication, etc., in order to be able to code appropriately.
Yes. That's why we often say real life coding, don't we? Real life coding isn't always as black and white as some of the examples that we might see in our training or in the PTC.
Yeah.
And what was also discussed in Berlin, what I found interesting, that there are different approaches in different companies. One do absolutely no context coding, which makes things very difficult. Others say, you can only do context coding because otherwise you would lose information. And well, we are trying to do a mixture and just make sure that the reported terms are as clear as possible if medical review comes across certain things that need clarification, or if we just don't have a chance to get more from the site.
Mm-hmm. We've had another comment come in about the meaning of implantations. That, yeah, I must say I wasn't familiar with this either. Peritoneal implantations being taken to mean metastases. Medically, ideally, you would query for the meaning of implantations because it does seem an unusual expression.
Yes, agreed.
I wonder if it's a translation. Might it have been translated, do you think? Or looked up from translation? Martin says it's from German. I don't know, Martin, if it's translated. No. Is that something? Is it?
No.
No, not from German.
No.
No, that's just.
Oh, well, it's a thought. It's a thought. Thank you very much, Kirsten. So should we move on to our next example? Feel free to send in any further questions or comments you've got as we move on.
Yeah. Lucy, now it's your example.
Thank you, Caroline. Okay, so moving on to another example here that we didn't get time to discuss in Berlin. So the term here is drug exposed to temperature excursion due to a patient fridge malfunction. So what do you think is being reported here? And where has this event taken place? So how would you approach the coding of this term? There's no suggestion in this term that the drug has been administered, so we need to look for LLTs that are suitable to capture that this event has happened during the storage. So if we look at some potential LLTs, we have product temperature excursion issue. We have incorrect storage of drug. Product storage error, temperature too high. Product storage error, temperature too low. Product temperature deviation error, or would we need to seek any clarification from the reporter? So let's have a think. There's quite a few to consider there. So interesting, a lot of people there, lots of people, 56% are going for the product temperature excursion issue. And it does say in the term that there's a temperature excursion, so that makes sense why you would select that LLT. We have incorrect storage of drug, 15%. And then a few people thinking the product storage error, temperature too high or too low. 13% gone for product temperature deviation error, and some people want to seek some extra clarification from the reporter. Okay.
I close the poll now. Yeah.
Thank you, Caroline. Okay, so let's have a look this time in the Measure introductory guide, because this can help us to code this term. So we can see here that it tells us that the HLT, product distribution and storage issues, is intended to cover issues with the storage of products by manufacturers, distributors, wholesalers, etc. In contrast, product storage issues by end users, such as healthcare professionals, patients and consumers, are considered to be medication errors and are therefore represented by appropriate medication error terms in the SOC injury, poisoning and procedural complications. So, based on this information, this tells us that we need to have a careful look at the Measure hierarchy. So a lot of us were thinking that we could perhaps select the LLT PT, product temperature excursion issue. But if you look at the screen here, the HLT for that PT is product distribution and storage issues, and the HLGT is the product quality, supply, distribution, manufacturing and quality system issues. So this would not be an appropriate LLT to capture this term, because we know that the temperature excursion happened not during manufacturing or distribution, but when it was under the control of the patient. So it was the patient's fridge that malfunctioned, and therefore we have to look for a suitable LLT under this PT of product storage error. And there are some that give us a bit more information that we might find useful here. So we have the incorrect storage of drug. We have the product storage error temperature too high or too low. Now, in this instance, I wouldn't have selected either of these. We only know that the patient's fridge has malfunctioned. We don't know that the malfunction meant that the fridge switched off and therefore the temperature became too high. It could in fact have malfunctioned so that the contents froze, for example, and the temperature became too low. So previously to this, the best LLT to choose here would have been the incorrect storage of drug. However, in Measure version 26, we have this nice new LLT added to this PT, which is product temperature deviation error. So this is telling us that there has been a temperature deviation, which we know from our term, but we don't know more detail of whether it was too high or too low. So I think if we move on to the next slide, this will just explain. So the learning points about this term are that we should remember to look in the information given in the Measure introductory guide for guidance on handling issues with product storage. And here, as I said before, the storage conditions in the fridge were under control of the patient. And there are no issue terms available for deviations regarding storage conditions that happen during the medication use process, as in here. So in this case, we know now that the most suitable LLT to select for the reported term is LLT product temperature deviation error that links to PT product storage error. So just explains a bit about the importance of referencing the introductory guide and also paying close attention to the Measure hierarchy when looking for suitable LLTs. So I don't know if we have any questions.
Thank you, Lucy. Thank you. And we've got a couple of comments more around the fact that you to take note, was the product actually administered? And if the product had been administered, what would you also have coded there? The suggestion we have is poor quality product administered if it had been administered.
Yes, I think that one is the one that comes to my mind as well.
Yes, often I think companies, we've talked about this in one of our previous sessions, and I think Carol Ann and I've said companies sometimes have conventions on how to code these examples if it's one of their drugs that you do treat it as a poor quality product. Exposing to temperature excursion is a too high temperature. Too low is not really covered by the verbatim. Well, I don't know. Exposure to temperature excursion, I don't think it necessarily means too high a temperature, Martin. You might want to elaborate on that one a bit. We took it that temperature excursion, we agreed with Lucy that it could be too high or too low because the fridge could malfunction in either direction, as Lucy explained. You might want to come back to us with further comments on that one. Those are all the comments we've had, Lucy. Thank you. Another area, medication errors and storage errors, are another area of real hot topic interest for our audience. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any more questions coming in or comments? No, not so far, Lucy. Thank you so much, both of you, for sharing with us today. I'll take back, I think Martin's saying that too low is less likely, I think is the comment there, but we don't know, but too low is probably less likely. I'm not sure. Excursion is the deviation from the labelled storage condition, Tom says, so it could be either way. Yeah, I agree. I agree, Tom. Okay, I'll take the presentation back and show my screen. So the next example we have is local darkening of skin after administering cream on forehead. So here, what's being reported? Well, we're told it's cream, it's been administered to the forehead, and there's been local darkening of skin. So I'm not sure what we could ask for clarification, but should we ask for clarification? What's the most appropriate LLT, if we can or can't? Seems like it's quite explicit there what's happened. Local suggests to me that it's just on the forehead. What would you code it to? We've selected a few terms for you. The first one is this lovely term that we found, dark staining of skin on forehead, or application site discoloration, application site pigmentation changes, application site hyperpigmentation, or application site macule. When we go to the browser, I'll take you to the product, to the term descriptions, the Medra term descriptions, to show you concept descriptions, to show you what application site means and explain why we've selected all four here of application site terms. What do you reckon? I'll show you where the popular votes are. Oh, fairly evenly placed today. Application site discoloration seems to be the most popular, but application site hyperpigmentation is not far behind. You put this one together, Carol Ann, this poll. Not many takers for your application site macule. And you'll see in a moment why we've included that one. Okay, so let's look the poll and move on in the interest of time. Let's browse Medra. So I'm going to show you clear the selection first of all, because the last time, that's one of my typical errors. So let's have a look at let's have a look at dark skin first of all, and let's see if we just search for dark skin, because that's the wording we've been given. let's have a look at dark skin. So we've got that term, dark staining of skin on forehead, which is a curious term when I first see that. So let's look at the hierarchy and try and make sense of it. Well, it actually has a PT of chloasma, which seems like it's a particular medical condition, and in a moment I'll show you how that's defined in Dorland's. We can see the hierarchy of that PT on the right-hand side. It's primarily in the skin and subcutaneous tissue disorders. It is a pigmentation disorder, but it also, if you have a look here on the right, it also has a link into the pregnancy stock as a secondary link. So this is then immediately giving me an indication that it's something specific to pregnancy, or could be. So I think we need, rather than choosing a term like that based on the LLT without really understanding what the PT means, I wouldn't choose that without looking at really understanding the PT. The other option that came up in my search is darkened skin, and this has a PT of skin discoloration. So interesting that the MedDRA treats darkened skin at the LLT level as a discoloration, not as a pigment problem. So this is an indication that I would store that away and think, well, maybe I shouldn't be jumping to pigment. Saying the skin is darkened doesn't necessarily mean it's pigment. It could be the start of necrosis or could be something else. So we can't necessarily say that it's pigment. It might be a burning or some other problem. Let's have a look while we're in the browser at the concept descriptions. And just for some of you who may not be familiar with these, this is a really useful resource for understanding some of the MedDRA terms. If I click on A and scroll down, you see we have the description of what does application site mean. Well, for purposes of MedDRA, an application site is considered to be the surface that contacts a topical medication in the form of a cream and other products. So you see there, that's why we selected application site options in our poll. So if you're less familiar, that's something that you might want to bear in mind for future. So I've shown you there why we selected application site. So we can have a look at the application site terms. Application discoloration. I'll just put it in like that as partial. Application discoloration, application site discoloration. We've got the two options, the British and the American English. So let's go to the browser and have a look at the hierarchy of it. It is multi-axial. It's in general disorders and administration site conditions. It also has a link to skin and to injury. So if you were wanting to do analysis for skin problems, you could pick it up with the secondary links. There it is, application site discoloration. It has application site hyperpigmentation underneath it, so it's considered discoloration, but I don't think I feel comfortable in making the jump that it is hyperpigmentation or pigmentation changes because we don't know what's causing the darkening. So application site discoloration would be the closest there. But let's go back now to our slide and have a look at how we reference. So pigmentation is the deposition of pigment. So we don't know that it's due to pigment in the skin, just the fact it's darkened. Hyperpigmentation is increased pigmentation. And then we have this term chloasma. So when we looked in Dorland's, it sends us to another condition, melasma. So looking at melasma, this is what it is. It's sharply demarcated brown macules. So now you see why we offered you macule as an option in the poll. Melanosis, so it's pigmentation again, and it's specific often during pregnancy, at menopause, and in those taking oral contraceptives. And here's a picture here from Dorland's. So that's very specific. It includes the forehead, but it also includes the cheeks, sometimes called the mask of pregnancy. So that's not what we have. We're just told that the patient has darkened skin on their forehead. So we never make assumptions. We never diagnose when we code. So we would keep away from that term. So the learning points from what I've shown you today is that we would always look at the hierarchy of potentially suitable terms. Don't just jump to when you see an LLT, because we could have so easily chosen that LLT without realizing it actually had a more medical connotation at the PT level, which would have been inappropriate. If you're not familiar with dermatological conditions, refer to reliable references and use the most specific terms for the type of reaction when you know that the site's site's been reported, and I showed you how to use the concept descriptions there, whether it's an administration site or here it's an application site. And I would select application site discoloration on that one. Any comments or questions, Caroline, on that one so far?
No, Martin is just confirming that pigment would suggest that that the color comes from increased melanin production, and this was not reported. So he is confirming the decision to go to discoloration term.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you. Okay, well, if there's no questions, Caroline, I'll hand over to you for your next example.
Yes, let me switch screens, change presenter. Here I am, show my screen. And here we are again. Next, it is reported that the drug caused a hyperpigmentation on areas that were exposed to sunlight. So it's a drug-induced condition leading to a hyperpigmentation on areas exposed to sunlight. Is this verbatim clear, or would a query be needed? Do we need to split code, and what would be the most suitable LLT or LLTs? So how would you approach this verbatim? What LLTs or LLTs would you select? Abnormal pigmentation, hyperpigmentation skin, solar lentigo, adverse drug reaction, dermatitis of exposed site, photosensitivity reaction. What would you do with this one? Would you split code? Would you just assign one code? And which of them would you assign? Let's have a look. So hyperpigmentation skin seems to be the favorite, but we also have votes for solar lentigo, adverse drug reaction, dermatitis of exposed site, and some of you also, abnormal pigmentation is not an option for you. So we have three preferences. Hyperpigmentation of skin seems to be the favorite, but also solar lentigo and adverse drug reactions. Some of you would split code as well. And photosensitivity reaction is also 33% of you are voting for this one. So let me close the poll here and show you a reference. Let us first look at this reference to better understand the pathomechanism of drug-induced hyperpigmentation. So this drug-induced hyperpigmentation can not only be caused by allergic reactions, but also due to direct reaction with melanin, leading to drug pigment complexes. This is often stimulated by sun exposure. Or some drugs may induce inflammation and post-inflammatory hypermelanosis that may become worse with sun exposure. And others may cause hyperpigmentation by directly accumulating in the skin or reacting with other substances in the skin. So it's not only allergic reactions that could cause these drug-induced hyperpigmentations. And a variety of drugs can cause hyperpigmentation, like non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, phenytoin, antimalarials, amiodarone, antipsychotic drugs, cytotoxic drugs, tetracyclines, and heavy metals. So quite a number. Now let me switch screens again and go to my browser. So abnormal pigmentation was one option. And if I search for it, here it is. Abnormal pigmentation, go to browser. We are on the skin SOC, yes, that's correct. But pigmentation disorder would be the PT, so this is much too vague. This could also relate to depigmentation or pigmentation changes in mucous membranes, for instance. So hyperpigmentation skin was the other option. Here we are. Go to browser again. different HLT, also in sock skin, of course, different HLT. It's the HLT hyperpigmentation disorders under HLGT pigmentation disorders. And here we have the hyperpigmentation skin and skin hyperpigmentation. So both of them would, of course, be correct, but it is always best practice to follow the word order of the verbatim. So that's why hyperpigmentation skin would be the best choice here. So we have the hyperpigmentation, and we know that it was affecting the exposed areas to sunlight, and that's why we can assume that it was that the skin was affected, not any mucous membranes. So this would have been the best choice here. Let's have a look at the other LLTs. And one option was Solar Lentigo. It includes the information that it was caused by the sun. And if I go to the browser again, it is also considered a hyperpigmentation disorder. And you see its age spots, liver spots, sunspots would be synonyms for solar lentigo, so the medical term. And this really describes a benign hyperpigmented macule on chronically sun-exposed skin, such as the backs of the hands or the forehead, usually seen in elderly people and light-skinned adults. And in our case, spots or macules were not reported. Our verbatim can also describe the hyperpigmentation of larger areas of skin exposed to sunlight, so not suitable for our verbatim. Another option was it was drug reaction. We know that the hyperpigmentation was drug-induced, but causality, if I look for drug-induced terms, you could, of course, look for something that would relate to hyperpigmentation. And we see that there's a number of terms that include drug-induced alcohol delirium. So let's see, restrict our search to skin sock and search. And here we have urticaria drug-induced. It's grouped under urticaria, drug-induced lupus erythematosus, lupus-like syndrome, drug-induced pruritus, pruritus allergic, drug-induced hypersensitivity syndrome. You see there are some drug-induced conditions, but there nothing refers to hyperpigmentations. So causality in this instance can be captured in separate database fields. It doesn't have to be captured via coding. You have separate database fields that would capture causality assessment. There are a few exceptions where the description drug-induced is an essential part of a defined medical concept, like for instance, DILI, drug-induced liver injury, or other drug-induced organ injuries. But in our case, as you can see, there is nothing that would combine the information adverse drug reaction and hyperpigmentation. LLT dermatitis of exposed site and photosensitivity reaction. Let me look at this one. Dermatitis exposed. Here we are, dermatitis of exposed site. Go to browser. It's grouped under photosensitivity reaction. So we don't know whether this was a photosensitivity reaction, whether this was really an allergic reaction to sunlight. You see photocontact dermatitis, photosensitivity, rash photosensitivity, solar sensitiveness, sun sensitivity. This was not reported. We don't know what the pathomechanism was behind. Of course, if you would know the drug or the product that this patient took from your company, then you may have a different coding conventions for it if you know the pathomechanism. But if you have no further information, if this is the only information that you have for coding purposes, this coding to a photosensitivity term would not be suitable in this instance. So let me switch back here. And it is always useful to search for suitable drug-induced terms when receiving similar reports, because a few of them, as mentioned earlier, are available in MedDRA, and may really represent defined medical concepts, especially when organ injury is drug-related, because they then link to toxicity PTs. And if no such term is available, the reported underlying condition should be coded with priority, because drug relationship can be recorded elsewhere in separate database fields. And here our final suggestion, we would go to LLT hyperpigmentation skin following the word order of the given verbatim, which is grouped under PT skin hyperpigmentation. Any questions, Jane?
No, Caroline, no, just a couple of comments that I've responded to. No questions on this one so far.
Okay, then I hand over to you again.
Okay, so let's try and do this next one because it's another skin example. Oh, let me just make sure. Here we go. Okay, so our next example is our last skin reaction, allergic to iodine, skin reaction, no anaphylaxis. So here's telling us a few pieces of information. What is it? Well, they're telling us there's some kind of iodine allergy. There has been a skin reaction. I assume it's saying that the skin reaction is due to the iodine. That's the way you would read it. But there's no anaphylaxis. Do we need to seek clarification? Maybe. Do we need to split code? Maybe. And what are the most appropriate LLT or LLTs if we do split code? So let's see what our options are with this one. Again, we've given you a selection here to choose from, quite a long selection. Iodine allergy, allergic exanthema, some kind of rash, iodine contrast media allergy, allergic skin reaction, hypersensitive skin, dermatitis extrinsic allergic, allergic contact dermatitis, or seek clarification. This is the selection we've given you here. So again, it suggests to me that it's a skin reaction, which I'm immediately thinking is a topical iodine, but it not necessarily is. I have to catch myself because when I see iodine, I think about skin cleansers and disinfectants, but it's not necessarily so, is it? I guess you could have a skin reaction to a drug you've taken internally or a contrast media. So let's see what your thoughts are. Next step. Allergic skin reaction is the most popular, with iodine allergy closely behind. So I think from those two, it seems that you're probably, most of you, thinking of split coding and selecting those two terms. So that's really interesting to see. The final choice there are those two are the runaway leaders in the choices, but I think it's a split code selection. So let's browse. I'll browse very quickly just to show you because I realize we're running out of time. Iodine, let's see what we have with iodine. So you see we've got 60 terms that include iodine. That's because there's a lot of test results. So let's see if we can look for allergies. I'll click on immune and see what we get with immune. I'll hold down the control key and I'll go for skin as well and see if there's anything with skin and redo the search. We have iodine allergy and iodine contrast media allergy. Any difference there in the hierarchy? Well, they have got different PTs. One's the iodine and one's the contrast media, but we don't know that it was contrast media that was reported. We do know it's iodine allergy. That's what we've been told. So we can look at the hierarchy for that one, put our cursor on it down here. It's allergies to foods, food additives, drugs, and other chemicals under allergic conditions. And then we can look at the skin reaction. So if it's due to an allergy, we can go for allerg skin reaction. That's probably going to bring us the term that you all chose, because that's combining the iodine allergy, and it's dermatitis allergic. We can do a right-hand click and go to the browser, look at the other terms. We can see that that's a different PT from contact dermatitis. Dermatitis allergic could cover whether it's a drug that's taken internally and gives a rash, allergic exanthema, allergic rash, all allergy, whereas you've got contact dermatitis is a completely different thing where you know the drugs or the product has been in contact with the body. So that's different again. Dermatitis contact is a separate PT, and we don't know that. We don't know if it was oral or if it was a product that was used on the skin. So I think with that, I'm with you on your choices that allergic skin reaction looks better, and we know that it's an iodine allergy. So that's what we've been told. One reference I will just mention here I thought was interesting was I found on PubMed an article which said that in some cases you should query iodine allergies because iodine allergy might be reported when somebody's allergic to foods, for example, not the iodine itself, or it might be something in contrast media which is causing the allergy, which isn't actually due to the iodine. And when this research was done, they found that there could be other chemicals within the contrast media, but it's often reported as an allergy to iodine. So be careful with it, and it might be something that if you see in future, you might want to query. So our thinking is that we would consider the type of allergy. Do we know, is it a topical skin reaction? Is it systemic? Have we been told? And don't assume this. Clarify if need be, add both the context and the route, whether it's a medicinal product, whether it's oral, a radioisotope, contrast media, or even a topical skin cleanser or food. So it might be a shellfish type of allergy that somebody's reported like this. Seek clarification as necessary, and if no further information is available, select a vaguer term or non-specific term which captures the allergic nature and the organ system. Consider you may have coding conventions internally for allergic reactions where details of the nature of the reaction, the causative agent and specific localization are reported. And when we did meet in Berlin, some of you may have been with us, we had another term that was brought up then that was an allergy, and we talked about the pros and cons of capturing the type of allergy versus capturing the symptoms. And in most cases, it's important with allergies to know the severity by capturing the individual symptoms, because allergies and hypersensitivity can cover a whole range of conditions, a whole range of symptoms. So here we would ask for clarification to further understand exactly what it was. Was it a contrast media? Was it some other product? What was the product? What was the context? If we can't query or we can't get any more information, we would code to iodine allergy, and ideally both iodine allergy and allergic skin reaction. But we have noted there that you may have internal company conventions that you refer to in coding this. So like you did in the poll, we would select iodine allergy and allergic skin reaction. Well done, everyone, for getting that one correct. So that's our last, we've got one example left. So Caroline, shall we save this one for next time?
I think so, because otherwise we will be running out of time.
It's a renal disease causing hypertension. So just a taster for you there. Please come and join us next month when we do our next session. Not long to wait. And I shall just let me zoom on to the end. I'll share with you our final slides here. So just as I mentioned at the beginning, we record these sessions. They are on the YouTube channel. And if you have a look at our website under training materials, you'll see that there's an index. We've been doing, this is session 21 that we've been doing in Europe, and our colleagues around the world have been doing it in other languages and in the US time zone as well. So we've got a number of sessions available on the YouTube channel, and so you can appreciate how many verbatims we've got. So what we've done is we've created an index for you that you can look at the date, you can look at the order that they're dealt with in the session, and you can also look at them by topic. So it's worth having a look if you're particularly interested in a therapeutic area. So that's just a plug there for our YouTube and our recordings. We're interested in your feedback. We mentioned at the beginning that we can't take verbatim terms in the session itself, but you're very welcome to give us topics or terms that you'd like us to consider for inclusion in a future session. And that's where we get a lot of our material. So I'll leave you doing the survey now. It should come up on the polling. You'll also get a SOGO survey emailed to you after the session. That's our standard survey. So please, if you don't want to give feedback now, you can do it in the other session. I'll leave you doing that. So with that, I'll thank you, Caroline, first for your collaboration in putting the session together, and then a special big thank you for our panelists, Kirsten and Lucy, who've joined us today from the Berlin panel. So it's really lovely to have additional thoughts, additional examples and voices for the session. So thank you, a real treat having you today. What's the other thing I will mention as well, if you weren't here at the beginning, you'll be eligible for a certificate if you are here for the whole session, but the certificate will be processed and it takes 2 days before you can download it from our website using the self-service application. Anything else you'd like to add, Caroline, Kirsten or Lucy?
Nothing to add. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll say bye-bye, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe, and I hope to see you all next month for the Now Next session. Bye for now.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye.